Thank you all very much for taking the time to be here today. I appreciate it. For those who were rolling in while I was rambling through the introduction material here, we're doing things a little bit differently than the typical way that I run this live session, in that instead of just having static screenshots to walk you through things, we're going to use a live account. And that's going to actually show you step by step how everything works, not just in those frozen screenshots, but actually in a more dynamic environment. We're also going to take some time at the very end of the session today to answer questions. And in the meantime, if anybody does have something that pops up, go ahead and enter it into the chat, and I'll keep my eye on that as close as I can throughout the session. And then let's go ahead and jump into officially who I am. My name is Drew McManus. I run Venture Industries Online, which is a web development firm that focuses primarily on nonprofit performing arts organizations, although we do have a broader nonprofit-based user group and a few commercial users as well. In addition to this, I've worked as a consultant that focuses on strategic planning, labor relations, board development, and executive review for about 27 years now at this point. My company, on the web development side, this is something that we work with all of our clients with getting all these analytics settings going and up and out of the box. But before we jump into the nitty-gritty of things, I do want to make sure everyone realizes the resources that are going to be available when we're done. As I've mentioned, we already are recording this, and everybody who signed up for today's webinar will receive a link more than likely tomorrow. Or an email tomorrow with a link to all the screenshot versions that typically happen in the live version of this presentation, as well as the streamed video version. You know, knock on wood, assuming that works okay. For those of you who are using Zoom, you've probably realized that if you're recording videos, they're taking a wee bit longer to process them and make them available than usual. So, you know, worst case scenario, it may actually be day after tomorrow before it gets uploaded. But that content will be made available for everyone and answer most of your questions. But by all means, you can reach out to any of my contact information with specific questions. I do realize that right now, because of the situation that everybody's in, being able to have a good free resource just to be able to ask questions is useful. So don't hesitate. There's never a charge. Reach out, ask away, not a problem. But today's session, let's take a look at what we're actually going to be learning about. Out of the box, Google Analytics does a fantastic job of processing all the analytics data that you're going to need. But in general, it only does an incomplete job, more or less. There are a few things that you're going to have to check in the settings and some adjustments that you're going to make to not just get better information, but far more accurate information, and also information that by Google's own privacy policy, they don't make available unless you manually activate it. So we're going to start off with the first step, which is going to be setting the primary URL. So this analytics account is actually one that I've set up for nonprofitbids.com, which up until the COVID-19 thing started to happen was going to launch last week, but that's been put on hiatus. The benefit for us is that I have not set up the Google Analytics account yet. So this is a live website that we're going to walk through and put things together piece by piece. So to start off with the primary URL, we're going to go to, let me move this out of the way on my other screen. In the admin panel, which is where we're going to spend most of our time. It's this little gear icon down here in the left-hand side. So when you've logged in, click here to begin with. In the property column, this one right here in the middle, we want to go to property settings. And there's a few things we will eventually hit here. But the property name, which is what shows up here at the top, you can edit that. But here, the default URL, this is going to be an important one to set. There are two things in particular you need to keep an eye on. One is going to be the prefix. You're either going to use the HTTP or the HTTPS. The difference between the two is the HTTPS is one that indicates a security certificate is in place so that you can process things like credit cards and take form submissions securely. And you do need to know if your site is running one or not. If you're not sure, just visit your URL, try using both versions. And if the HTTPS version throws a browser warning or security error, you know you're not using that. Next is going to be the URL itself. And here's another thing you have to be careful about is to whether or not you want to use the www version. And by www version, I mean the www version of your URL. The best way to tell if this is going to be your primary URL or not is going to be whether you've got that set up by your web developer or your web host. If you're not sure, go ahead and reach out to either of those individuals, and they should be able to tell you for sure. You could also try visiting your website with the www version. If that redirects to the non-www version automatically, that means you need to use the non-www version. Long story short, and keeping it small on the geek speak end of things, the www version and the non-www version are actually two mutually exclusive versions of your website. So you do want to make sure that you're using the correct one, or you're not going to get entirely accurate data all the way through. So once that's in place, just make sure that it's copied all the way through and you are using the .com or the .org view properly all the way through. Let's see. Once that's done, just slide down to the bottom of the page and click Save. And that's really all there is to it. So that was number one. The next thing we're going to work with is activating demographics. Now, demographics is going to be one of the most important tracking features that you're going to be able to use to not just figure out what your age groups are and if they're male or female users, but also using those for secondary dimension for cross-tabulation to figure out which age group by chance is using mobile more than others. But by default, because of Google's privacy policy, this is not activated by default. So turning it on is super easy. You don't even have to go to the admin panel side of things. Instead, flip over to Audiences and Demographics. Click on Overview. And when the screen loads, if you see this page, it's going to tell you that it has not been enabled yet. If it has been enabled, you'll start to see data listed in the same way that most of your other analytics screens do. All you have to do is just click the little enable button, and that's it. Simple, done. One thing you want to keep in mind is this data is not stored retroactively, meaning that even if your analytics account has been running for years and years and years, if demographics have not been activated, you're only going to start pulling information from the point it was activated. And even then, it's likely going to take you, depending on how much site traffic you get, 2 to 3 weeks before you'll start actually seeing data showing up here. But once it does, you're going to get a wealth of useful information going on. All right, next up, we have activating Google Signals. And this is something that Google rolled out about a year ago and is not dissimilar from demographics in that by default, it's not activated due to Google's privacy policy. Now, to turn it on, we do need to go back to the admin panel. And once there, we need to take a look at the under the property column again, this center one, we need to go to tracking info and then data collection. Now, if Google Signals is not activated, this is the screen that you'll see. It'll have a lot of information about what it does, how it's going to be used, and it will take you through the process to actually begin activating everything. So to get started, just click that blue Get Started button. You'll see more information that was very similar to what they just had on the previous page. give everything a good read, and then click continue. And then you'll get even more information about everything they had already explained to you, although you do now have the ability to select the property that you want this to be applied to. Now, unless you already have multiple properties set up in your Google Analytics account, 9 out of 10 times you just want it to apply to all properties. There are very few circumstances where applying this to individual properties but not others would be necessary, and it's not even worth covering in this session. It's so unique. So make sure that you select all properties and then click activate. It will confirm that you're all done, click the done button, and now it's up and running. Just like demographics, it's going to take you some time before you start to see this information being displayed on the front end. But once it is up and running, you're going to find this information in a few different places. One of the most useful is going to be under your audience component, and then cross-device. Because Google Signal is now tracking users when they're moving between their mobile device and something like a laptop and desktop. So now you're going to have a better idea of somebody that's moving through your site, and your analytics will start to show you the amount of time, where they're going, and the kind of activity that they're engaging in based on each of those device types and the device paths. So highly useful even if you've had your analytics account up and running for a considerable amount of time. You definitely want to take a moment to go ahead and activate signals. Okay, next up, there are some relatively new filtering tools in place. One of the biggest problems with analytics is making sure that you start to eliminate the amount of false data coming in. And unfortunately, spammers have been doing an exceptional job in the past year at dumping a lot of garbage data into your statistics, likely without you even knowing about it. One of the tools that Google rolled out several months ago is an automatic bot filtering option. And to activate it, we're going to go back to our admin panel. And then in the view settings, under the view column now, over on the far right, you'll see a little checkbox for bot filtering. All you have to do is check it off, and that's it, nothing else. Click save, and then moving forward, a large ratio of the garbage bot filters, or what's called ghost referral spam, will start to get filtered out. If you've been running your site for a while and haven't had this activated, do not be surprised or alarmed if your average traffic numbers go down a little bit. You know, depending on how much your site was being targeted, it could be a little change or it could be a lot. I've seen users actually have as much as a 5% drop in their traffic, but that's not a bad thing. You can now take that to your executives and your board members and be able to demonstrate that the information coming in isn't bad because it's less. It's actually far more accurate than it was before. All right, next up. Alongside with filtering bots, you do want to begin to filter out your own visits. And what I mean by that is this. Actually, I'm going to start this off with a story that I typically use to demonstrate the value of this. I call it the $8,000 decision. We had a client at one point in time who was developing a new website, and we were putting all the information together and putting the site together. And about 3/4 of the way through the project, they approached us and said, oh, by the way, we need to make our site compatible with Internet Explorer 8. And even though I can't see your faces right now, I'm hoping that it's mostly kind of a look of surprise, because yeah, you don't need to make your site compatible with Internet Explorer 8. Even 2 years ago when we were working on this, you didn't need to make your site compatible with Internet Explorer 8. And explaining to the client that this is not likely something they want to do, and it will incur a very large cost to make this functionality backward compatible. They said, well, we did what you told us to, and we went and looked at all of our analytics, and we looked at the data, and we discovered that just about a little over 10% of our traffic is coming from Internet 8 browsers or Internet 8 browsers, right? And I was a little surprised by this. So I thought, let's take a look and see what's up. So I popped in, took a look at the data, and sure enough, just over 10% of their traffic was coming from Internet Explorer 8. But the next step was to take a look at their exclusion filters. I wanted to see if any were in place, because this particular user ran under the auspices of a local government as opposed to their own nonprofit. And it turned out that that local government required all of the employees and offices, whether they were decentralized or not, to use Internet Explorer 8 as their default browser. So once we went in and discovered, sure enough, they were not excluding their own visits, we put this exclusion filter in place, gave it about a week to kind of kick in. And at the end of that process, that little, or that just over 10% of Internet 8 Explorer ratio dropped down to 0.0000. Why are we even bothering to measure it? Because it's so low ratio of their traffic. So they were understandably thrilled that they wouldn't have to end up spending an additional $8,000 on their project having to put Internet Explorer 8 compatibility in place. That is one of many examples why you want to filter out your own traffic. But to begin with, you actually want to start off by opening another tab. And in the top, you just want to do a Google search for what is my IP? And it will tell you what your IP is. And look at that, there's my IP address. Keep this tab handy. You're going to want to come back to analytics now. And in the admin panel, you want to go to that view column again. Let me back out so we can get to the starting point. The view column here, and this time we want to select filters. We want to create a new filter. Clicking the add button. Now give the filter a very specific name, because you have to be thinking about the people who are going to be following you at some point in time. They're going to look at this and they need to know exactly what's being filtered out. So I'm going to create one called Drew's Office. I'm going to name it 2 because I already put one in place for my office earlier. But I'm going to come back here now and copy this IP address. Moving back to the analytics screen, under the filter type, we want to hit predefined. And then we want to exclude. The source and destination is going to be from the IP address and then are equal to. Each one of those 3 steps is important to get correct, or you could end up not successfully filtering it out or filtering out more than you want. In the IP address field, go ahead and paste the IP address. Anything that shouldn't be there. And if for any reason you came up with one of the longer IP addresses than this one, that's okay. There are 2 types. One's not better than another. You just need to make sure that you filter out the correct one. Once that's in place, go ahead and click Save, and the system will have it up in place and running. Now, moving forward, you need to check a couple of different things. If you're working inside an office environment, you do want to ask your IT department, if you have one, if everyone in the office is running under the same IP address. If not, you need to have everyone in the office that has a unique IP address get that IP address to you. Usually an IT department can provide that information. Worst case scenario, you just have to go from computer to computer and do that Google search for what is my IP, and you'll find that information. You also want to create filters for anywhere else where you're going to be doing work routinely. And given that most folks are going to be working remotely right now, this is something you probably want to do with wherever that remote location is, whether it's home or anywhere else. So follow this same process and enter in a filter and make sure it's labeled correctly. There is one caveat that I want to make sure that everyone's very aware of when you create one of these IP-based filters, is when you're connected to the internet, you need to be absolutely positively sure that you're connected via Wi-Fi. If you go through this process when you're connected to the internet via a cellular connection, you'll get the IP address for that cellular provider. And if you put that in place, you're going to inadvertently block all of the incoming traffic, or at least most of it, from that specific cellular provider. So the last thing you want to do is block all incoming traffic from Verizon. That would not be good. You'll likely know if you made this mistake because you will probably see a very large drop in your daily site visits. So just keep that in mind. It's one extra thing to check. All right, let me pop into chat and see if there's anything happening there. Somebody mentioned background noise. I think everyone's microphone is muted, but if anyone's having problems, just post something in chat and I'll take a look at it. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the third type of exclusion we need to put in place, which is a referral exclusion. And this is something that will fall into the maybe pile if you need to add one or not. There are two basic type of referral exclusions, and a referral is going to be someone that points traffic back to your website. One of the most common ones is going to be something like a third-party ticketing site. Let's say if you sell tickets through your organization, someone clicks the buy ticket link and they go to that provider's website to complete the transaction or to make a donation, that would be a referral source, because likely at the end of that process, they'll be moved back to the primary website. That traffic from that provider back to your website is something you actually don't want to track because it's not really legitimate referral traffic coming in. You will be tracking the individual's movement from one site to the next if you have cross-domain tracking in place, but you don't need to list it as a referral. So putting the referral exclusion in place is pretty straightforward. From the admin panel, again, we want to navigate to the property column, the one in the middle, and then we want to select tracking info. And then we want the sub menu of referral exclusion list right here. Now you can go ahead and add one, selecting this red button, and all you have to do is enter in the domain. That's it, nothing else. And entering in the domain, let me use the one I have for example here, is you can leave out the prefix, which is the HTTP or the HTTPS. You only need to include the www if you're absolutely sure that's the primary domain of the referral source. When in doubt, leave the www off. And then you just paste that URL, the domain name, into the field and save it. And that's all it takes. So let me open up a new one here. That's where you would enter the information in. So whatever the primary top level domain is for your ticketing provider or your donation provider or anywhere else that you regularly push people to where they're going to come back, you need to enter that domain. The second one that's typical is your own primary domain. The same thing that you entered in the very first step of the items that we're going through today is what you want to include in a referral exclusion domain. Now, there are other instances of something you may want to filter out, but those are going to be more specific case use. You'll know if you need to start to add something if in your reporting dashboard from your referral sources, you start to see a lot of URLs from sources that you know you don't need to track. It should be fairly obvious. This is where you want to come into the admin panel side of things and enter that URL as a referral exclusion. All right, moving on. Next up is going to be search tracking. By default, it seems kind of ironic that Google does not activate search tracking. But what we're talking about here isn't search tracking coming in from Google searches. It's search tracking that's inside your own website. And not every site has a search built into it. Most do. And if it does, by default, Google Analytics won't track it because it doesn't know the query parameter that your site uses to indicate a URL is a search result URL. And don't worry about what all that means. I'm going to walk you through each step of that. So to begin with, we're going to go back to our admin panel. And in this case, we're going to start off in the view column, and go to view settings. And then scroll down and you'll see this toggle, site search tracking. And that is not easy to say 3 times fast. Go ahead and click it on, and then you're going to see this little field appear below, asking you for that query parameter. Now, here's where you get to do a little bit of sleuthing. You want to go to your site. As a matter of fact, I don't even think I have search activated on this site yet because it's not entirely up and running. So what I am going to do is go to a site where I know I do have a search up and running. And the site I came from and the site I'm going to are both WordPress based. And most WordPress based installs have the same basic search query parameter. But in order to find it, go ahead and conduct a search. Doesn't matter what you search for. Now, up here in the URL, you'll see right after the .com/ a question mark followed by either one letter or a series of letters or some kind of string of alphanumeric characters. Depending on your publishing platform, it may be one or another. All you're looking for is whatever appears between that question mark and the equal sign. In this case, it's the lowercase s. You can either copy it or just memorize it. Come back to Google Analytics, and that's what you enter in here for the search query parameter. Enter that in place and click Save. When the screen reloads, now Analytics is going to be tracking that as a default dimension inside your analytics reports. Now, moving forward, there is the potential that depending on how your developer has your site set up, they could be using pretty permalink structure that strips out all of this stuff right here that comes after the .com/. It's not good or bad. It's just the way some folks do things. And if that's the case, you're going to have to reach out to your web developer and ask about that query parameter. It's really simple. They should have no trouble telling you what it is. But if you don't see it, don't panic. That's probably the reason why. If you're using another platform like Weebly or Wix or Drupal or whoever it's going to be, or even a custom platform, the query parameter is not likely going to be quite this straightforward, in which case that might be something you have to refer to the documentation about, or you may have to look into contacting that provider directly. But once that's in place, everything gets tracked moving forward. All right, we are in the home stretch here. And the last thing we're going to be doing is setting and adjusting the default session and campaign lengths. Now, what those are is measuring how long analytics should be looking for somebody who's on your site. A session is going to be roughly the amount of time that analytics determines that someone's moving through your site, and if activity stops at the end of that session length, Google is going to go ahead and cut it off, and that will be the end of a session. So they're not going to track that anymore. By default, that is going to be 30 minutes. And for most performing arts organizations, that's kind of a long time. Your average time on site is likely going to be lower than that. And the danger of having it too high or too low means you're going to get incomplete or inaccurate information. So changing it's a piece of cake. From the admin panel, we want to go to the property column. And in tracking info, we want to go to session settings. And on this page, you'll see both the session and the campaign timeout. You can set this anywhere from 1 minute up to however many hours you need. And I strongly encourage you to come back to this screen on a regular basis throughout the year, because there could very well be times where your session lengths should be changing. Like, think about it. If you have a season announcement and you're driving people directly to a landing page where there's really only a couple of options or maybe half a dozen options, where the primary conversion goal is to push them through to something like a subscription purchase, you want them to spend as little time on this page as possible, likely. So you want to ratchet this number down to a more reasonable number. The campaign length is going to really depend on your own unique circumstances. Using that same example of a subscription or series launch notification, you may have a very set period of time that those initial subscription sales are available. Like, let's say you're doing a pre-sale for existing subscribers only, and that's going to last for maybe 2 weeks. You can go ahead and set your campaign timeout for that 2-week time span. And at the end of it, come back to this page and adjust it for whatever you think is going to be a reasonable amount of time to begin measuring all of your subsequent campaign lengths. This becomes useful depending on the type of goals that you're going to set up for yourself in analytics and some of the other custom reports that you'll build for yourself. If you don't do any of that, then the campaign timeout time won't have quite as much impact. But if you do, you absolutely want to come back and pay attention to the campaign settings. So let's take a look now at a few things that we are not going to necessarily be covering today because we don't have the time, or this is not the right environment for that to happen. These are going to be some of the other primary items and high priority items that you do want to try to take care of in addition to putting these settings in place. One of them is creating and then connecting a Google Search Console account. This is something that will give you more accurate information, and on its own is where you upload and connect the sitemap from your site so that Google knows which pages are which, and when you make updates, they process it faster. It will give you things like 404 error reports and all kinds of awesome stuff. Just do a Google search for Google Search Console, and it will take you to that startup page where you can connect the account, and once that's in place, you'll be able to connect that to your analytics account. In the resources that I'll be sending out an email to everyone, I'm also going to include a link to an article that I've written at artshacker.com that explains what a Search Console account is and how you can connect it to analytics. Another one's going to be excluding URL query parameters. Again, I've got an article about that covers it in detail. It's more of a medium skill set level item to do. So if you're comfortable doing it, it will lay out what it is and how to go about it. We talked earlier on about selecting the profile for your analytics account. If you do need to create additional profiles or you need to add users, I'll send along a link to how you can go about doing that. How you can access and edit the change history dashboard on your analytics account, which is an absolute must if you have more than one user inside your analytics account, because you kind of want to know what other people are doing inside there. And then creating annotations, which actually we can look at this one really quick. There's no reason why we can't. This is super cool, life-changing, awesome. Annotations on your timeline from most of your audience reports. If you click this little down arrow, it will open up this new little bar. Select Create New Annotation. And this is just like a little footnote that you're going to leave for yourself. Enter the date that you want it to apply and then enter some information. For example, if this is the date that you launched your subscription campaign and all those emails went out, and you want to record and remember that that's likely a reason why you're going to be seeing a spike in traffic, this is where you can enter that information. You can also enter in information that is sometimes recording negative events, like let's say, God forbid, your site got targeted by a DDoS attack, and so that would explain a huge dip in the numbers. All of that is useful to keep track of in these little annotations. So you can create as many of these as you want. Individual users inside the analytics account can create as many of these as they want that are unique to them or shared with all other users. So I'll send along a link to the article that shows you how to do everything we just talked about, but it's definitely something you want to keep handy. So we are just a couple of minutes over what I thought our time would be. Let me go ahead and pull our chat back up. And I am also going to start to unmute folks. So if there are any questions, we can go ahead and begin to process those. So bear with me for just a moment while I start to get all of this put together. Okay, you should notice in your own user panel that there's going to be a little microphone that's now going to be open. Although if I do hear a lot of background noise, like I hear Ari, I am going to mute that. Sorry, Ari. And if you want to mute yourself back up, go right ahead. Otherwise, feel free to go ahead and ask questions. And I'm going to pull up the chat screen here and take a look at that. And if there aren't any questions in them, we'll just go ahead and wrap things up, and I'll be contacting everyone when we're done. But let me go ahead and take a look at this first and see what's going on. Okay. Let's see, I've had varied success filtering based on IP4 versus IP6. This is from Joe Bobman. It's interesting. I'm not sure exactly what your success has been and what those problems are. If you can hear me right now and your microphone is muted, go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can include something in chat. Most problems that I find with folks, oh, there we go. I have somebody. Was that you, Joe? Nope. Okay. Most problems that I find is just getting the wrong IP address, or over time, your IP address may have actually changed. That's not uncommon either. Like Comcast cycles IP addresses every time you turn your modem or they reset it. So, you know, if that's the case, just double check and make sure that the IP addresses that are in your filter list are up to date and accurate. Let's see. For activating demographics, do we need to take additional steps in our privacy policy? Excellent question. Yes, you absolutely do. I would hope by default that you have your analytics connection to your website set up so that it recognizes what's called a do not follow or do not track request from the individual user. If you do, that will automatically get processed and pushed through into analytics for you. If not, yes, you do want to update your privacy policy to indicate that you are tracking demographics inside analytics. Excellent question. All right, next, can you give more examples of what referral sources you might exclude and why? Oh, well, in addition to something like, like your ticketing providers, if you have like a membership portal, or you have, I think some other users that we have, like for example, we have a user that has, as part of their membership benefits, a library resource. From a third-party provider, that the users have to access that online library from the third-party provider by logging into the primary website first. That would push them off of this third-party provider, which eventually pushes them back. So anything you can think of that you push people out that automatically moves them back is a prime candidate to include. All right, and let's see. Questions. Oh, so many nice comments of being helpful and thankful. Thank you very much. I'm glad everybody got something useful out of this. All right, let's see. Do you recommend adding an annotation for when you activate exclusion filters so it's easier to see why a dip in traffic may have taken place? Excellent question, and yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, most of the measures that we're putting into place now, if you're doing them at the same time, dump all of that into a note into one of your annotations. Any kind of major change that you make, adding new users, creating new properties, making new custom reports, anything that would impact what you see in your data is going to be worth putting an annotation in place for. I mean, really, you can't have too many of these things. And whoever's going to follow you in your position, because you know it is an arts group and attrition happens, they are going to be grateful that you put that information in place. I promise it. All right. And let's see, last question we have here. There are a couple degrees of separation between our site and where patrons buy tickets. They have to first go to our venue site and then to the venue's ticketing site. Oh, wow, I'm sorry. That's a lot. Should we exclude both or just the ticket site URL? That's a good question. The primary one to include is whichever of those two sites is going to automatically push traffic back to your site after the transaction is complete. So my hunch would be is the first of those two steps in the process, the venue, you don't want to include that unless they do automatically push traffic to your site for some reason. But let's say they've got their own event calendar and they list your organization and your events, and if somebody clicks on that, it pushes them to your site. You absolutely want to include that as a referral source. So in that case, you wouldn't want to include them. Okay, and it looks like we've had another question come in. Let's see. Let's see. Traffic that doesn't seem useful and has an abnormally high bounce rate. I think someone's asking, that is in reference to, let's see, I'm not sure exactly, but it feels like, oh, here it is. I think that was a follow-up on, is it worth excluding traffic that is not going to be useful ever? And the example of that, I guess, is something that has an abnormally high bounce rate. Don't get spooked by bounce rates. And a high bounce rate is not in and of itself a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it can be the desired outcome for one of the examples we used before. Oh, and my cat woke up from her nap. So if you hear her, yeah, that's who it is. She's 17 and hard of hearing, so she can be kind of loud. But for example, if you're pushing someone to a website and the goal is to get them to click that buy ticket link as soon as humanly possible, a high bounce rate is actually a good thing. Now, I would say if you have an abnormally high bounce rate on a page that doesn't typically have a high bounce rate, then that might be worth digging into the analytics a little bit more to see where traffic leading to that page is coming from. That's the referral in that case. In that situation, yes, you would want to dig into that information, see what that referral is, visit that referral, and determine if you want to go ahead and include it as an exclusion. And even as I'm saying that, I'll give you another important caveat to that. If you remember where I mentioned something called ghost spam earlier in the session, that's one of the newer malicious attempts that spammers are using to get you to visit spammy websites, is they inject this garbage into your analytics as a referral. And if it looks even remotely suspicious, like print stickers online or something stupid, anything stupid like that, it is absolutely positively a spam site. There's nothing there other than they want to try to get you to look at it and to get your eyeballs on it or drive traffic to it. Don't go, don't visit, don't Google it, don't do anything. Just ignore it and include that as an exclusion filter. If you are getting absolutely positively slammed with ghost spam, and by slammed, I mean if like your top 10 referrals are from garbage websites, there's something more important that you need to do, and you'll need to likely reach out to an analytics professional to put some very complex level exclusion filters in place. There's a provider that I actually outsource for my company that I use because it's complex enough and it takes enough time. It's just more cost effective for me to even use his services. I'll be happy to provide that as a resource to anybody who wants it. All right. And it looks like, I think that's the end of our questions. Well, wonderful, everybody. I won't take up anyone else's time, but thank you all again very much for popping in this afternoon. I hope everybody learned something useful. Definitely keep an eye out for something in email tomorrow or the next day at the latest. Once the video gets done processing, everything will get uploaded and we'll be able to move forward. between now and then, feel free to reach out to me at any of that contact information you see. You can send me a DM through Twitter. There's a contact form at Venture Industries Online, and any of this contact information. Drew at ventureindustriesonline.com. Just let me know that you were part of this webinar, and I'll be happy to help out any way I can. So take care, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.